So the economic shockwaves from this coronavirus pandemic are hitting hard in Australia today, with thousands of jobs in the balance at Virgin Airlines. We just had that announcement in the last hour or so, confirming that the company has gone into voluntary administration. While business is struggling, at least there are some positive signs, with some countries emerging from the worst of the daily death tolls of coronavirus, and the number of new cases in Australia continuing to be low, with growing talk of possible eradication here. So here are today's key developments with this coronavirus story. Virgin Australia has gone into administration after the government rejected pleas for a bailout. The airline is $5 billion in debt, hit hard by travel restrictions. US oil futures have dropped to negative values for the first time, with global energy demand drying up. The main benchmark closed at minus $37 a barrel. National Cabinet will discuss a plan to lift the ban on elective surgery. All such surgeries were suspended last month to keep hospital beds free for COVID-19 patients. New South Wales is taking steps towards bringing students back to school. The Premier says children will return to school classrooms in 3 weeks for 1 day a week. France has joined Italy and Spain and the United States in recording more than 20,000 deaths. Spain has passed the 200,000 cases mark, while in Italy the number of people currently confirmed to have the virus has fallen for the first time, and some countries in Europe are starting to ease some of the restrictions. So let's take a look at some of those elements in detail now. So Virgin Australia has gone into voluntary administration as the airline struggles to stay in the air because of this coronavirus pandemic. Senior business correspondent Peter Ryan joins us now from Sydney. Peter, g'day. So first of all, take us through this statement this morning.
Good morning, Joe. Look, a very sad but inevitable morning, particularly after the federal government repeatedly knocked Virgin back on that bid for a $1.4 billion loan. We've been expecting this announcement late yesterday and all this morning. It hit around about an hour ago, maybe a bit less than that. But Virgin into voluntary administration. What does that mean? The board of Virgin met well into last night and made the decision to call in the administrators, the corporate insolvency firm Deloitte, sometimes known in the business as the corporate undertakers. But despite that term, the role of Deloitte is to get into Virgin, get behind the books, and attempt to restructure Virgin to keep it running as a going concern. It's not collapsing. The airline remains. It's not flying, or most of it is not flying at the moment, like other airlines around the world, but the administrator, Vaughan Strawbridge from Deloitte, is saying that they have good hopes of turning Virgin around, restructuring its debt, talking to other investors. So it's not entirely bleak, but it's a desperately sad day for those 15,000 Virgin staff, many of whom came in from Ansett, which collapsed back in 2001, joined Virgin Blue, joined Virgin Australia, and now they're going through this whole thing once again.
And Peter, a lot of those people might be watching this morning, those Virgin employees, keen to get an idea of what's actually happening and what the prognosis is. And from the people I've been speaking to this morning, it does sound like there's a bit of optimism about Virgin getting back up in the air and flying. Well, it's still flying to an extent now. But what is the message to those employees out there this morning?
Well, the message from the administrators, without having talked directly to the administrators, but their aim will be to save as many jobs as possible. Of course, many of those stood down Virgin employees are on the JobKeeper program, or will be on the JobKeeper program. The aim is to ensure that if any jobs need to go, that worker entitlements will be maintained. Of course, the big investors behind Virgin Australia, Singapore Airlines, Etihad, the Chinese-owned HNA, and Richard Branson, who owns a little bit less at 10%, they'll be lining up to try to get back what they can, but it's highly likely that they'll be taking a haircut, losing some or most of their investments. And this is the big reason behind the federal government deciding not to provide this loan or a bailout to make sure that any taxpayer money is used to support Virgin employees. But you're right, there is a lot of optimism that Virgin will be back, but it will be dramatically different, more likely as a cut-price airline. And the critical issue, the big political and social and economic issue, is that when we get through this COVID-19 crisis and that planes start flying again, that Qantas shouldn't be allowed to have a monopoly in the airways, and that a strong competitor like Virgin or like a new Virgin will be necessary to make sure that there's that level of competition on domestic air routes.
And Peter, talk through how it's come to this for Virgin. It's been in the air for about 20 years, I think. Was there a period where it had established a really good niche for itself, or a really good position for itself in the Australian market, and then did it reposition and it didn't really, that repositioning didn't really work? So talk us through how it's gone over the past 20 years.
Well, this goes to some of the criticisms about the way that Virgin has been run over the years. Of course, Virgin Blue was around even back when Ansett was flying, so it was the model was to be a cut-price competitor. And Virgin Blue morphed into Virgin Australia and decided that they wanted to compete as a full-service airline against Qantas. And of course, going through other crises like the global financial crisis, and of course post 9/11, there was a lot of competition in the airways, and critics of Virgin were saying they made a big misstep in moving from that cut price model, trying to compete with Qantas on its own turf. And of course Qantas has not just the financial power, but the market power to squeeze Virgin out. And even before COVID-19 started wreaking havoc through aviation, Virgin was having a lot of trouble dealing with those high debt levels, now more than $5 billion. And in the release out this morning, the Virgin board had acknowledged that even before COVID-19 hit, they were looking at ways of restructuring the airline, restructuring staff. But of course, COVID-19, like any other industry around the world, but in particular aviation, was the straw that broke the camel's back. And this is where we land today with Virgin Australia in administration.
Yeah. OK, Peter Ryan there in Sydney. The federal government is standing firm and not handing Virgin a lifeline despite the airline going into administration. Reporter Dan Conifer joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Dan, g'day. So what's the coalition saying in response to this news this morning that Virgin has actually gone into voluntary administration?
Joe, good morning. Well, Matthias Cormann, the Finance Minister, has been the government's main spokesman this morning on this issue, and saying that the government is, concerned about the jobs of those that work at Virgin Australia, but it wants to see a market-led solution first. It wants to see if private companies can come in and help Virgin, whether that be private equity firms or otherwise, or even the Virgin's own shareholders, large international airlines and cashed-up international investors. Those firms, those entities should be Virgin's first port of call. Although the government, it's not ruling out entirely, doing something over the weeks and months ahead, but it does want to see what the process looks like during administration. That, of course, is in contrast to Labor's calls. It, for weeks now, has been calling on the coalition to extend Virgin Australia a line of credit and to take a stake in the airline, a stake that it could later sell potentially at a profit back to the market once that Virgin had sorted through its issues and the skies were open for airlines, as they were before COVID-19 took hold. So two very different positions from the major parties. We're expecting to hear from the Labor leader Anthony Albanese shortly, calling on the government to do more to help the airline and its workers. But before we hear from him, let's take a listen to Matthias Cormann speaking earlier this morning on RN.
We didn't believe it was appropriate to provide specific support of that size to one individual business, setting a precedent across the economy. We've stuck to an economy-wide, sector-wide approach rather than to bail out individual businesses. And we don't believe that all of the private sector opportunities have been exhausted here, and we believe they should be.
Matthias Cormann there. And Dan, also today the Prime Minister is meeting state and territory leaders and they're expected to ease restrictions on elective surgery. What procedures are included in that?
We don't know exactly what ones yet, but they're likely to be ones that present a low risk of COVID-19 transmission from patient to doctor or even doctor to patient. Things like knee and hip replacements, IVF, even colonoscopies. So the medical officials met yesterday and will present their options to National Cabinet this morning, and they're likely to focus on Category 2 procedures, those Category 2 procedures that aren't currently underway. Remembering that in late March, the government put a hold on elective surgeries except Category 1, so the most urgent category of elective surgery, as well as urgent Category 2. So we're expecting them to focus on the other Category 2 surgeries, and medicos and doctors and healthcare workers are keen to see this happen. There is capacity in the health system at the moment, but they are mindful that they don't want personal protective equipment stocks to be depleted, so that they're saying that this does need to be a staggered and steady approach. Tony Bartoni is from the Australian Medical Association. He was speaking earlier this morning on News Breakfast.
When you look at their quality of life, when you look at the pain that they might be enduring, and when you're looking at the complications of their underlying conditions worsening, that's a significant amount of morbidity that people are being asked to endure. But it needs to be case by case, patient by patient, condition by condition, and we can start to unravel that as readily as very soon.
Tony Bartoni there from the Australian Medical Association, and we're expecting to hear more details about exactly what the premiers, or the chief ministers and the Prime Minister come up with later this afternoon, Joe.
Okay, Dan Conifer reporting there from Canberra. New South Wales students will return to school classrooms 1 day a week from May the 11th. So that's in 3 weeks' time. Reporter Lara Himes joins us now from Sydney. Lara, good day. So take us through this plan in New South Wales.
Well, we did know that the New South Wales state government had a benchmark for when they wanted to begin resuming classes for school children across the state, and that had been earmarked initially at the week 3 mark of term 2. Now, we did know that that was going to be more of a staggered approach and more of a rostered approach, but we didn't know exactly what was involved in that process. So the New South Wales state government has unveiled a few details as to what that would really look like, as well as some of the precautions that will be in place, not just for students but also for teachers. So what they've added today is that there will be sanitisers in place for everyone to use at the time of when those classes do resume, and it'll be looking to do students returning back for about 1 day a week and then gradually building up to a full resumption of classes. But even that, we still don't know when that will take place. We also know that there will be an increase in the way that play equipment is cleaned, and we do know that there's going to be temperature checks as well. Now, in terms of who will be going back and when, we have heard that that will be left up to schools to decide how that would work. There is a preference to be sending back school children who belong to the same family, but once again, that will be up to the individual school to work out how that allocation will take place. We've heard from the New South Wales Education Minister this morning, who says that she'll be relying on the flexibility of schools.
There will be flexibility and discretion on a school level as to how they implement this. We want them to make sure that they are having about a quarter of students on campus each day, but how they break that group up will be a matter for them. But we are asking them to certainly consider family groupings, keeping siblings together, so that will make it a lot easier for parents as we transition back to normal schooling.
And Lara, what's the latest this morning on new cases in New South Wales?
Well, there's been a big improvement in the quantity of cases and the trajectory of what we have been seeing. Some of those figures nationwide have really been tapering off, but that has also garnered a warning from the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, saying that people should not really become complacent about this positive outcome here. She said all it takes is a handful of people for the virus to continue to spread and also create new clusters. Now, we have had some positive news as well in terms of the analysis of the number of cases that we've been experiencing of coronavirus, and that, of course, is the recovery efforts. Dr. Kerry Chant, who is the Chief Medical Officer today, said that with the cases of coronavirus, half of those cases recovered in 16 days and 95 cases had a recovery rate of about 6 weeks. So looking fairly positive in that. 6 cases in the state of New South Wales, but in addition to that, there have been more than 15 15 additional cases of coronavirus that have been linked to the stricken Ruby Princess. Now, those numbers aren't actually included in the state average because that is offshore. We do know as well that the Ruby Princess is currently docked at Port Kembla, so that is south of Sydney, where crew members are still on board that vessel. But there have been some good news coming out of that this morning. We know that there are about 49 crew members on board that vessel from about 6 different countries, and they will be embarking on a repatriation mission. It's a multi-agency approach involving New South Wales Police and also Department of Transport and a raft of other departments. Of those 49 people, one person has tested positive to COVID-19. That person will go into strict quarantine for 2 weeks. The remainder of those 48 passengers will begin their trip to where their country of origin is. So they will be taken back to the airport and taken back to their nation of origin.
OK, Lara Himes reporting there from Sydney. The head of the World Health Organization has responded to criticism of its handling of the coronavirus pandemic, saying the US gets the same treatment as every other country. US President Donald Trump has accused the WHO of promoting Chinese disinformation. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus says divisions between people and countries are making the pandemic worse.
There is nothing hidden from the US from day one, because these are Americans who are working with us and just comes naturally, and they just tell what they're doing. And for WHO, it's open. We don't hide anything. It's open. Not only for CDC, them sending messages or others, we want all countries to get the same message immediately. People say this is political and Tedros, you're a technical organization, don't say it. But if it's fueling the pandemic, and that's the very reason, why wouldn't I say it? At the end of the day, we should know the root cause of the problem and try to address that. It's fueling it. The cracks between people, between parties is fueling it.